Good morning, Patrick.
How you doing?
Okay.
You were just telling me.
Just one correction. It's April 6th, not April 5th.
Oh, April 6th. Well, I was close,
And
right?
I only point that out because this is I have twin nieces, and it is their respective birthdays today.
Well,
so happy birthday to my twin nieces.
Happy birthday to twin. And where do they reside, these twin girls?
New York and New Jersey.
Uh-huh. So they're twins, but they don't kind of live in the same city. They split up.
No. One's married with kids. The other one lives upstate New York. So two different places,
Yeah. So
Northeast area.
I asked you how you were doing before the show and, how's business? And you said, tell folks what you told me.
I've never been this busy. I'm
Wow.
pushing close to 40 years in being involved in this market. And this past year or so has been absolutely stunning. The volume of transactions has exploded. The sizes of the transactions have increased. Demand across the board is larger. We're experiencing lots of interesting issues as we move forward. Here's an interesting anecdotal, strange quirk. So some of our customers may know if they buy large quantities of coins from us, there are these, we call them row boxes. And they're these plastic square boxes that the grading service NGC provides.
Yeah.
And they're maybe, 4 inches tall and 2 or 3 inches across and about, 8, 10 inches long. And they stack about 20 coins. So you take a certified NGC coin, it stands upright and it has slots, and 20 coins will line up in the slots, and you have this row box.
Oh, yeah. I've got one of those boxes. Yeah, I've got one of them.
Yeah, they're gray. They got cool ones in red.
Right.
So of all the things that we're having problems with, we're out of row boxes. And NGC is saying they can't get supplies of row boxes, and they don't know when we'll be able to replace them. It's just one of the weirdest quirks of supply chain economic problems that the shipping boxes that we use to send quantities of coins have suddenly become difficult to get.
So
forget the quantity of coins.
Forget the coins, yeah. So we have to be clear. We have new people all the time join us from all around the world, and you buy and sell gold and silver numismatic coins that were made at the mint. There's a limited supply. You don't do bricks, bars, bullion, those kind of things, right?
No.
That's real clear. That's what you do. And even the coins that are not graded, pre-65, is it 64 or 65, Freddie?
Well, 64 is the last year that there's silver. So technically, if you say pre-65, that kind of
you're
covers
good.
it.
These are dimes and quarters and halves and silver dollars
Half dollars,
that are
right.
they're half dollars that are not graded, but they're called currency silver, and they have a lot of silver in them, so you sell those as well. But that's what you provide, nothing else. You don't do
right.
Like I can't order a 2-pound brick of gold from you.
Let me tell you something. The regulations on bullion, which is why I don't do it. I've always had a problem with it fundamentally. I thought the values were much more appropriate for investors to buy something where the supply was fixed. Mm-hmm. So I always thought the coins made more sense. I've also been a big fan of the idea that if you're protecting your wealth, and that what we're saying here is protecting against that U.S. paper dollar, right? That paper note we all trade in. I thought the idea was more appropriate to have legal, constitutionally issued money. So that precluded the idea of the bars and all that from the very beginning. What's really beginning to happen, and part of the reason I had hesitated to deal with it, was because the government regulations started to get more and more restrictive. So they are really becoming very, very strong about regulating bullion transactions because there's a massive amount of money laundering being conducted by bullion traders. And even the refiners are complicit in it. There's illegal gold being transferred up from like South American countries and being melted by the bullion refiners and then sold for cash. And then the cash is sent back down to South America. And, because of this massive amount of money laundering, the government has regulated the bullion market. So they've imparted the regulations through the system down to us as dealers, because their presumption is if you have, for example, chunks of gold that you've either found in the earth or you have bars of gold, we have no way of knowing where that originally came from. But if they force me as a dealer to file a 1099-B on you with your social security number your name, address, and how much you sold. Anytime you try to liquidate that particular material, they know that they're covering the money laundering problem by making it a regulatory issue so that none of these transactions occur in the dark anymore.
Wow.
And they're becoming progressively more strict.
So are you suggesting that it's always going on, I guess, Freddie, but where if I would go somewhere and buy, I don't know, what do they sell those gold bars in, like you see in the movies? What are they?
Well, the ones in the movies are fun. They're usually either 100 or 1,000-ounce bars.
1,000-ounce bar.
They've gotten better about this in Hollywood. Originally, they'd have guys picking up these 1,000-ounce bars with one hand and waving them around like it was not. Those things weigh 60 pounds
60
each.
pounds.
And,
okay.
Yeah.
So I buy a 60-pound gold bar. Excuse me, but if I buy a 60-pound gold bar and I pay whatever that is, we could do the math here this morning. I could possibly be buying something that wasn't really gold.
No, it's probably going to be gold.
Probably going to be gold.
The issue of whether it's legitimate or not, it's always been a part of the problem. There are pretty well-known refiners, though. Like a lot of things in life, if you go to respectable refiners, they put their stamp on it. It, for the most part, eliminates the issue of whether it's real. The bigger problem, though, is the regulatory issues.
The regulatory issues. So if I buy a gold bar and I got to do a 1099, or the seller's got to do a 1099 and all that.
When you sell it.
When I sell, wait a minute. Not when I buy it?
Nope.
But when I sell it, say I want to sell, so gold goes up $500. I say, okay, I'm going to sell it. I got to do a 1099 on the whole thing when I sell it.
Right. Which means you're going to have to prove your cost basis, because if you can't, then the entire amount that shows up on the check that I write to you looks like income and will be counted as income on your tax return.
So I'd have to prove my cost.
I
have to prove my cost.
Yeah, you have to make sure you keep your cost basis and keep a record of it, a legitimate record of it.
Interesting.
So this is how they're trying to, again, regulate this industry.
Yes,
they're forcing the compliance on us as dealers. And what they forced me to do, not only filing those 1099-Bs on anybody who sells me bullion, but they also make my entire business follow all of the anti-money laundering rules, which means I'm supposed to operate the way banks are supposed to operate when they started the war on cash.
No, your customer and all that.
Right. You remember all that. So how they dealt with the cash problem of saying if you had 100,000 in cash and try to conduct commerce, they instituted the 1099 rule and the 1088 rules, saying that if you walked into your bank or you try to buy a car with more than 10,000 in cash, the transaction itself became reportable. It didn't matter where the money came from. It was the transaction that had to be reported. Then they instituted this rule where they gave it to the banks and let them say it's a know your customer obligation on the head of the teller. A teller who's not a banker. This is a teller. This is a hired job, right? So they're supposed to say, well, this transaction Patrick is doing is suspicious.
Oh.
So I'm going to file a 1088 or 1099 and make sure that the transaction is reported. So they prevented people from, let's say, if you were doing this, money laundering and bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars in cash and depositing it in the banks. However, as we know, a lot of the big banks, the ones that we call the boys, right, the guys that are the top tier guys, they have been participating in money laundering schemes for so long. They've gotten caught with their hands in the till. I mean, the worst offenders like HSBC were directly all over the world taking hundreds of millions of dollars in cash transactions from well-known criminal activity and letting them open up accounts and deposit those funds into their accounts.
Yeah.
And they got caught, and nobody went to jail. They paid fines. They paid fines in the billions of dollars that accounted for maybe 5 or 6 days worth of their revenue stream. So it effectively did nothing. So there's been a lot of complicit nonsense going on, but they are forcing individual bank tellers for the you and I individuals. We don't get away with that too big to jail nonsense. We will go to jail if we are found guilty of money laundering. So they're trying to make me operate the same way with bullion, the way the banks are trying to operate
So
with
to be
cash.
clear, this is why you don't deal in bullion. You don't want to be involved in any of this stuff. And
Right.
you at US Coin Capital just do numismatics, constitutional money that are graded by two different grading systems, and it's a private transaction all the way around.
Correct. You could sell me $100 million worth of numismatic coins. I write you a check. It is up to you to report any gains that you've made, but I am not obligated to take any personal information. I'm not required to file any forms with any government agencies, and I do not. So you're treated like an adult. You know, you're responsible for your own actions in this industry, and it's not up to me, like a parent over watching a child, to dictate to you that, hey, I have to take this personal information and send it to daddy who wants to know about what you're doing.
Wow. So that's why you and Andrew, when you got involved in it with numismatics and not the bullion. That's one.
And the other reason, which we brought up earlier, is the difference in supply. So what I really love, and what always has intrigued me about the numismatic side of the world, is that we know in 1964 that the U.S. government ended the production of these dimes, quarters, and half dollars. They stopped making them.
They just did.
So that's it. It ended at that point. When it was gold, it ended in 1933 when Roosevelt was still president. We stopped production of U.S. gold coins. So they can't go back in time to produce more to add supply. So that meant we already knew what the maximum available number of these things that existed could possibly be. All we had to do was count the number of coins that they minted, which they kept perfectly great, accurate records of. We know how many of these things were produced. We also know that major melting of gold and silver coins, which, believe it or not, is actually illegal, but it has occurred historically. In 1933, there was a massive melting of pre-33 gold coins. In 1980s, there was massive melting of silver coins, which was not supposed to occur, but it has. And that leaves us again with whatever is left in the world today as that fixed supply. And it is having an impact. I think you and I have talked about how years ago, probably when you and Andy first started together, silver dollars were still part of what we called the junk silver.
Yeah.
In other words, they were readily available the same way dimes, quarters, and half dollars were at the same kind of premiums over melt. But over the years, they began to separate themselves because there were just less silver dollars in the world than there were of the other size coins. It turned out they minted the silver dollars only up to 1935, but the other silver coins, they continued to mint until 1964. So we had about 30 years more production of those smaller size coins, and a lot more of them were minted than the large dollar size. Over the years, the dollars separated themselves and now carry more than 100% premium over the amount of silver in them, even for the worst quality circulated silver dollar.
Explain what you mean. So silver today is, I don't know, I don't have my chart up, but silver today is, let me look real quick.
24 and change.
You probably know better than I got it here. I got $24.51. So $24.51 for an ounce of silver. Then what's a silver dollar cost?
Silver dollar, you couldn't buy one for less than about $40.
Really? Wow.
And it has 0.77 ounces of actual silver in it.
Whoa.
So it only has about $20 or so in melt value, but it carries a premium of over 100% more than its melt value, even in circulated condition.
Because?
Now, this is starting to happen with half dollars. We've had 6 price increases on the half dollars over the quarters and dimes since January of this year.
Whoa. Really?
6 times.
Just the supply and demand. Just supply and demand.
Just the supply and demand problem is pressuring the half dollar market now to where, we're at $8.50 over spot on half dollars now.
You've never
so
seen
a half
this.
dollar selling for 30 times face value. It's about $15 for a half dollar today, which is perfectly appropriate. But it goes to the point of why I've always loved the idea of the fixed supply, because those people that happen to have purchased half dollars, quarters, and dimes, they benefit not only from that upward pressure on the price of silver itself, but any additional value that the physical form that they hold that silver in might carry on its own. So if you bought silver dollars 20 years ago and only paid 15 or 20% over melt, you've gained not only from the price of silver going up, but also that additional premium you can now get if you were selling silver dollars.
Which has been your whole argument with numismatics, constitutional money, and a limited supply
Yep.
from day one. Day one.
And I've always compared this to the other side of the coin, no pun intended, which is the ability to print paper money.
Yeah.
So we run an economy on paper money. We have since 1971. We've floated money in the United States that's not backed anymore by any form of anything, especially gold and silver, so that the supply of paper money is not constrained, unlike the supply of the gold and silver coins. So over time, what's happening is these two things are diverging. The difference between them is getting farther and farther apart. They used to be equivalent. You know, there was a time when a $20 paper bill was a $20 gold coin, a 1 ounce gold coin. They were the same thing. And then over the years, they started to separate themselves more and more apart. You know, so now it takes 2,500 of those paper bills to buy that same decent quality $20 gold coin. And there's no reason that should be the case, except we are running an economy in the United States with unbacked money, and we have a government that loves to spend more than it has. Oh. And as a result of that, ends up having to print a lot more money to solve its economic problems. And coming out of this pandemic the past 2 years, I mean, it has been a global pandemic, but in the U.S. alone, the supply of money has increased by over 40%
that's
in a 2-year time frame.
That's just crazy. You know, I've seen that number, but I don't understand how that's even possible. We're talking with Fred Dashevsky. If you'd like to join the show, 888-663-6386. Email patrick@oneradionetwork.com. And so I've read that, but Fred, it can't be 40%, is it? I mean, they've only created, haven't they, 5 or 6, 7 only $1 trillion in the last couple of years? That's not 40%.
Okay.
So
no, there's more than that, right? You're only looking at the Fed's balance sheet.
Right.
Okay, that's just the Federal Reserve's balance sheet that's gone up by $5 trillion. So remember, the Fed had on its balance sheet debt in the form of bonds that it buys from the U.S. Treasury. This is a way the Federal Reserve pushes money into an economy, is it goes to the U.S. Treasury, it writes a check out of a checking account that has nothing in it.
Right.
It deposits that check with the U.S. Treasury and gets back in exchange a note from the U.S. government that pays interest.
Yes.
So effectively, the Fed has loaned money to the government on a promise it would get repaid with interest on its loan.
Si, senor.
The Federal Reserve has increased its supply of that debt by about $5 trillion in 2 years.
Yes,
which
I'm
is
looking
stunning.
at it now. We're at $9 trillion this morning. Well, 8.9, something like that. Yeah,
It should be just around $9 trillion.
9 trillion, right. So that's just what the Fed bought from the Treasury when they created those dollars, right? 5 trillion.
Right. Beyond that, we've also printed additional money. We sent stimulus checks to everybody in America.
No, wait, though. That's got to go through the Fed. The Treasury doesn't create the money.
Well, the Treasury, again, utilizes the ability to run up debt by saying, okay, we don't have this money, so we're going to go ahead and simply print checks, and we're going to draw from the ability of the Federal Reserve to back us up, knowing that the Fed will cover whatever we do.
Oh, so okay. Let's slow down.
There's additional financing gimmickry going on.
Oh, cooking the books, eh? So I understand. See, I was under the impression that to print the checks, they would create a Treasury bond, get the money in Treasury, and then print the checks. You're suggesting that's not necessarily true. They can print the checks.
Well, that's not the whole picture. So that accounts for part of it. But again, I guarantee you that there has been
lots of money.
You know, how do we want to put it? A little finagling of the numbers, where we're creating a lot more money than is really being reported the way that you would account for it if you were running an actual business. So
who's going to check at that level, right? Who's going to know?
Well, it's hard. It's really hard. It's difficult to get the information. I mean, you and I have gone to the Federal Reserve's information on Fred, right?
Fred.
So we've looked at that stuff, and you can follow that, but it's, you almost need an accounting degree or an MBA in order to, dissect it all. But the end result of this is the total supply of money that existed
Yeah.
from 2 years ago to now has changed by a factor of an increase of 40%.
That's
This is why
mind-boggling.
people are beginning to experience inflationary problems that the Federal Reserve now has to deal with. And it has really put itself into a very awkward position and surprisingly has been surprised. So surprisingly surprised? Yeah, that sounds funny. The Fed constantly reiterates that it's surprised by the rate of inflation that they're seeing in the economy now. Yet they knew they printed all this money. They knew they sent out stimulus checks. They knew the Fed's balance sheet had exploded. They knew the supply of money had expanded. Yet when the numbers started to come out and filter through the economy, the Fed was shocked. Now they face a problem of saying, okay, we've released the beast. The inflation beast is back. It's been dormant since the 1980s. I mean, it's been 40 years since the U.S. economy has experienced inflation at the levels we have right now. There's an entire generation that has never lived through what inflation feels like in an economy, and it's hitting them hard because it's experiencing changes that people see now. And we've talked about this 100 times, that by the time you feel the impact of inflation in the terms of higher prices that you're paying,
Yes, sir.
that is an after effect of all of that
Of all
has
the money.
happened prior to that.
The money printing and all, it's come down the system,
Right.
right? It's filtered down. So by the time it gets to milk or eggs or meat or whatever, which is going up.
Right, a lot. And rent.
And rent. It's been
And
been a
mortgage
long-
rates. And interest rates.
Everything's going up.
And herein lies the problem. So now the Fed says, okay, we have an economy that we're coming out of a recession. We're coming out of an extremely slow-moving, almost recessionary economy. How do you move an economy forward? Well, you do things like lower interest rates, or you do what's called quantitative easing if lowering interest rates isn't sufficient. And that's what the Fed did, because even though they lowered rates down to zero, it wasn't enough. And since they couldn't go negative, they took another approach. They got very creative and said, well, we can institute something called quantitative easing, which is the Fed buys lots of debt and effectively does the same thing as lowering interest rates. It pushes more money into the economy to make it cheaper and more readily available for everybody to borrow. Who took advantage of that? The big corporations in the United States. They borrowed all this cheap money and used it to buy their stock. So they drove stock values higher and higher.
Yeah, which is why the market where it is today, right? Yeah.
But not because the company made more profit, but because they were able to borrow money for next to zero. And if they could raise their stock price by 2 or 3% or 4%, well, that's profitable.
Yeah.
So that's what was done. Now the Fed is facing the reverse problem. They now have to start quantitative tightening. Now, Brainerd, one of the Fed governors, said yesterday, first of all, that inflation was too high, which I think is funny. Again, it's as if they're just waking up to the problem that they created. It's like me climbing a ladder and keep going up the ladder rungs, and I get to way up there, and then I look down and go, oh, I'm too high.
I'm too high, yeah.
I'm way too high off the ground. I need to come down. How did I get here? Well, you kept climbing the rungs of the ladder. So the Fed kept printing money and lowering rates and doing quantitative easing until they pushed so much money into the economy. They were managing to move it forward, but at what cost? The cost is they flooded the streets with cheap money, which is diluting the value of the money that you and I are trying to save, but it's also now going to force the cost of money to go up. So if you've noticed in the last month, mortgage rates crossed 5% yesterday for the first time in
30-year fixed?
Years.
5%. Wow.
5%. First
I
time we've seen that number.
That went up pretty quickly, didn't it? Wow.
Yeah, it sure did.
Whoa. I mean, weren't they about 3.5% a few months ago?
Yep. And remember that the government carrying debt is paying interest on the debt. The interest payments on the government debt is the second largest item in its government budget.
Yes, it is.
So as interest rates go up, the carrying cost of those tens of trillions of debt also increase, which leads the government to want more money. How are they going to get that? Well,
they're going to
tax more from you or print more, one or the other. And the printing has created its own problem. So now the Fed has a problem. It's overprinted it should have started to slow down this quantitative easing and this low interest rate environment a year ago, but it didn't. And because it hesitated, it has now waited too long, and it's going to have to get very aggressive if it intends to do anything to fight off all the inflation that we're now beginning to experience because of the money they printed. If they go too far too fast, we get a recessionary economy again. Mm-hmm. After having done everything we've done in the past few years, we're back where we started with 40% more money in the system.
Fred, they're talking about raising the federal funds rate another maybe 50. They'll probably do 25 again next month and then 25. But with all this money sloshing around, is that really going to make the price of gas or meat or milk or eggs go down? Not really, is it?
Well, that much won't. They're going to have to do a lot more, and this is the problem. How far do you have to raise rates to fight back this inflation beast?
Right. How much would you
half a point do it? I don't think so. Most people are saying it's going to have to go up 2.5%, and they're calculating that, well, that means we're going to have 6 or 7 of these rate hikes. And people are saying, well, if you do that, if you raise rates 6 or 7 times in a short period of time, less than a year, you're going to force an economic slowdown. And then what do? Because you've already played every hand in your toolbox to fight off the recession coming out of the pandemic. You're going to be back to where you started if you raise rates too quickly. You won't have solved the inflation problem. And where does that leave you? It leaves you with a potential for stagflation, which is probably the worst case scenario.
Which is what happened in the 70s, right? When they raised rates up to 15%.
An economy that isn't moving, but inflation's still going up.
Right.
That's a real bad scenario.
So tell folks why the interest rate hikes, big picture, slows down the economy and gross domestic product. Because is it credit cards and car loans and everything?
Yeah, it's pretty much everything. So imagine it from a standpoint of an individual. The cheaper it is for you to borrow money, the more likely it is that you will borrow money.
Yeah, sure.
Right? How likely are you to buy that high-ticket item? How likely are you to take that mortgage on that expensive home? When the rates are cheap, that mortgage becomes much more affordable than when the rates go up. They've already said that the average mortgage will have increased with the new rates some $400, $500, $600 a month. And that is the difference between maybe being able to make that mortgage payment or somebody now being priced out. So that's how you slow an economy down. You make the cost of borrowing money more expensive. Corporations will stop utilizing the game of buying cheap money and floating up their stock prices. So the stock values will not go up the way they did the past 2 years, simply because the companies are buying their own stock. If the stocks are going to go up from here forward, it's going to have to be on actual earnings, real growth in the stock. Which they don't have,
do they?
Some of them have, some of them don't. But a lot of them got away with murder the past couple of years. There's been 30% increases in stock values just predicated on their ability to buy cheap money and float their own stock prices higher. So without the stock market going up, everything changes. When interest rates are going up, the entire economic environment is much more difficult. It's just not easy anymore. It's going to be harder for all this stuff to move forward. And again, on top of that, the Fed is worried that if they don't adjust rates fast enough, that the inflation beast will run amok. It'll just run amok, and they can't afford to have that happen either.
Why not? Do they care about if it's a Democrat or Republican administration? Do they care?
I don't think so. I mean, this seems to prevail over the course of time, regardless of who is president.
They don't care.
And I love how everybody either gives credit to or blames a current administration for an economy that they really, in effect, had nothing to do with.
That's not true, though. I mean, the Biden administration and all this free money and Build Back Better and the Green New Deal and all the free stuff, that was their deal. That was their deal.
They're complicit to a degree in how they manage what they do.
That was their deal.
Some things that were done in the past were very beneficial for the economy as a whole. Other decisions are not and are expensive. And again, like that Build Back Better program, I mean, things like that are in the trillions of dollars, they don't come free. because again, the government doesn't have that pool of capital to draw from to pay these things.
Sure.
So it has to pretend somehow that either the economy is going to grow so much because of what they do that it can absorb all that debt, or in the end, they're just going to say, we're going to have to raise taxes, but don't worry, we'll tax the other guy. And it's never you. It's always the other guy.
The rich guys, we're going to do that.
You never get, your taxes never go up. It's always going to be the other guy until that doesn't work. And then the only other recourse, when all else fails, we can always print more money. And that, to me, is the default that has to become much more likely, because I don't think the other possibilities make sense. I don't believe at all. I will state adamantly, there is no way we grow our way out of the debt that we've created.
Not gonna do
There
it.
is absolutely no scenario that the economy grows fast enough or large enough to absorb the ridiculous amount of money we've created. So let's say that's off the table. That leaves taxes or printing money. So I believe it'll be a combination of both. I think taxes are going to go up, and I think they're going to print a lot more money. And that, to me, means that person who is saving his capital needs to recognize that if the government goes ahead and continues to do this game of printing money to solve their problems, it does change the value of the money that people are saving. That paper dollar will lose purchasing power. It'll be inflated and diluted. And the only way to counterbalance that is to have in your assets the opposite side of that, something that actually will go up in purchasing power under inflation. And that is the exact idea of ownership of physical gold and silver coins. It's why people do it, outside of the enjoyment and the fun of participating in the market and the comfort that people get in having that physical, pile of gold and silver. There's just something really, it's settling for people. They feel a lot better about themselves when they have, something real that they can physically hold and touch and say, okay, here is where my money really resides. Because I pose this question a lot to people. You say you have assets. What are the assets that you own? And let's strip away your home, because you might take an equity loan out, but you're not going to cut your house in half and use that to raise capital. So it's an all or nothing principle, and you live there. So you're probably not utilizing that per se as an investment. Outside of that, where is your wealth stored? What is it actually that you have that really constitutes money? And I really believe that if you think this through, you come back to this idea of constitutional money and recognize that that was a brilliant concept. And that's the way people should store long-term wealth.
What an idea. Fred Dashevsky is with us. If you'd like to join us, 888-663-6386. Email patrick@oneradionetwork.com. So at the beginning of the show, you said in all your 40 years, you've never been as busy. What do you attribute that to? I mean, this kind of information is not out there. You got to look for it. I mean, our shows are unique. There's other shows out there, but not a whole lot. I mean, people got to get really look at it to understand what's going on. So evidently there are a lot of people that are getting this whole fiat money system printing
And
thing,
I'll tell you why.
Right?
And
Why?
I think what's making it realistic and making people aware of it is the fact that they've done this so poorly and managed this money system so badly that it has now created an inflationary problem that an average person is experiencing.
I see. That's
And again,
what's going
remember
on.
now, we haven't really seen this in 40 years. So it's not as if the past 40 years there weren't shenanigans going on.
Yes, sir.
Right? They've been doing all sorts of nonsense. I mean, 2008 was unbelievable, and we can spend 4 hours just on that, and the manipulation of the economy and everything that happened in 2012 and 2016. So for the past 40 years, we've been manipulating the economy, but it hasn't been as clearly visible until now, when the inflationary numbers are growing and people see now that, that pound of beef and the chicken and the gallon of milk and the cost of gasoline. And again, there are other variables in some of these products as well, but the overall impact of inflation is very visible in real terms to real people, even on a day-to-day anecdotal basis.
Yeah.
Mortgage rates.
So that's
and
what's going
rent
on.
increases and
That's
things
what's
that
going
people have to deal with that they can't get around. So it raises a question in people's minds very quickly of what happened. I was okay 2 years ago. I was making roughly the same income and managing my bills and saving. Now all of a sudden I'm coming up short. What happened? What's different? And this awareness is driving people to rethink, especially their long-term savings. Because anybody who can do the math and draw this line out and say, if this is where we are today in 2022, what's this going to look like 5 years from now or 10 years from now? The money supply, there was roughly 10 trillion 10 years ago, 20 trillion 10 years ago, 20 trillion. Today, there's about, let's say, roughly 30 trillion. So, all this additional money that's been added into the economy, what will it be in 2030? Will it be another 10 trillion on top of what we have now? And what will that do to any savings that you have? So I think this is what is driving the volume of business that we're seeing, that people are actually experiencing this in their day-to-day lives.
And as you know, with the whole idea, supply and demand thing, everybody involved feels it, and then they kick it up a little bit. And I guess all the people you're buying stuff from, that's what happens, and that's the way it goes. Look at those. Would you say the silver dollars 6 times? It raised half
silver
dollars.
Half
yeah. Dollars.
The premium over quarters and dimes.
6 times.
They've separated themselves now 6 times since the first of this year. We're only in April.
Is that right?
So what's happening is supply and demand is beginning to, show its nature. And there always were less half dollars, and we always knew that. But again, we got away with this for quite a while, where they traded at the same premiums as dimes and quarters, just like the silver dollars used to, until it got to a point where just couldn't do it anymore. The industry just couldn't handle it anymore. The market began to recognize the reality. There are fewer of these. And I watch dealers, in this industry scrambling sometimes to get, bags, a bag is 2,000 half dollars. So they refer to a bag of silver as $1,000 in face value.
In face value, yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So 10,000 dimes, for example, is a bag. 4,000 quarters is a bag, because that's 1,000 face value. 2,000 half dollars is a bag of half dollars. 1,000 silver dollars, bag of silver dollars. And the premiums for bags of dollars and bags of halves, they just keep going up and keep going up and keep going up. And I have watched many of the largest dealers in this industry periodically struggling to be able to get inventory. And it's about it seems like every 3 or 4 days, bids are going up, raising the prices. Dealers are posting, I'm paying more now than I did yesterday for silver. We'll buy at higher price than yesterday. We'll pay more. And they're constantly upping themselves 1 week because they just can't get enough inventory. And we will get to a point where, this is going to become a real problem.
Is the same thing going on, Fred, with the more expensive, like in the plastic cases of the St. Gaudens and those really popular, really numismatic coins? Are they going up as well?
The same thing is happening there. Really? And again, there are a lot of different kinds of gold coins that exist, from the real rare ones, which constantly are shattering prices when they come up for sale again. Dealers are raising their prices of what they're willing to pay. And we're stuck in kind of a weird point where a lot of people don't want to pay a higher price. So what's happening is nothing. It's as if you want to buy it, you're going to have to pay more than the current price. It's like, if you're selling your home in a hot market, you're probably not going to take an offer necessarily even at the price you asked for it, because 3 or 4 people are offering above your sell price.
Right.
The same thing is happening with these rarer coins. A lot of people are trying to get them, and they're trying to buy them at current prices. No one wants to sell at that level. They always want a little bit more. So there are some transaction problems that are occurring. We just finished one of the larger regional shows in the Northeast, in Baltimore. This was a show used to do, $3 to $5 million. It was considered a pretty big weekend. They did tens of millions this weekend. And the market demand was just massive. I mean, dealers were really saying that they saw a very powerful show.
Really, really
So
interesting.
it's interesting. The dynamics are continuing to improve in this world.
Here's a little peek at Fred's business here. Got a little slide for you. It's his phone number is 800-878-2646. U.S. Coin Capital 800-878-2646. Pretty fun time to be around in the biz, Fred. Why not? You know, you might as well. have some fun,
it's
right?
interesting. You know, struggling to maintain inventory is, you know, it's a dual-edged sword. You know, in one way, it's obviously very good to have a business that, you know, there's so much demand that, you know, you're barely keeping up with the inventory. In other ways, you know, from a business standpoint, as a business owner, it certainly would make my life simpler if there was lots of inventory available all the time at levels that were consistent, and then I could just deal with whatever the price changes in the metals were and go from there. But, you know,
Always
they say you want to live in exciting and interesting times, and, you know, be careful what you wish for.
This is it. Here's an email from KMF. Did your guys claim that bullion sellers file tax forms on transactions?
Yeah, we're required as a dealer, if someone sells me bullion, I am under a federal law requiring me to file a 1099-B with the social security number, address, and name of the person who I bought the bullion from,
Really?
and the amount I wrote the check for. And then it's up to that person to be able to say to the IRS that that's not all income because I have a cost basis. And I can prove that with this receipt for the purchase, which is interesting because imagine if it were, you know, surreptitious acquisition of that gold. How do you justify your cost basis? Which is what their effort is to try to curtail what's happening in that industry, which is a lot more money laundering, you know, utilizing that market. And I've mentioned this because I think, you know, Janet Yellen is testifying this morning. She's also mentioned that, you know, with this Russian situation, they're concerned about the cryptos being used for money laundering purposes and the oligarchs in Russia. So, you know, what they're leaning toward, and I am forecasting this, nobody has said this yet. When I say nobody, I mean nobody within the government is saying this is going to be the case. I believe we will have reportable transactions in cryptos the same way they do cash transactions. What they'll do is they'll make the transaction itself reportable. So if you want to buy a car with your Bitcoin and it's more than, let's say, $10,000 in value, the transaction will become reportable.
Sure. And right now, I think even on last year's tax return, if I recall, they have it right there that you need to report any buy or sell cryptocurrencies.
Yeah,
it's right.
already asking, so that,
yeah, come on.
You know, they're kind of laying out the foundation to say, we have records now that you indicated in 2022 that you bought X amount of this cryptocurrency. So, you know, where'd the money come from?
Even if they have people are buying and selling crypto that are private, I don't know if Bitcoin is or not, or who knows. It's still, according to Title 26, you know, whether or not the law is constitutional or not, they claim that you buy and sell something and you make a profit, you got to pay tax on it. That's their law. So, I mean, what are you going to do? Even if they don't have a record of it, it's up to you. If you want to play that game, well, go ahead. You know, I don't recommend it.
But watch what changes when it becomes federally regulated.
What do you mean?
It's one thing when I ask you to report it voluntarily. It's another thing when you're required to.
Oh, so that you think that they're going to say to Bitcoin and Ethereum or whatever, but these are all on it would have to happen on the exchange, right, where you buy the Bitcoin, where they're going to mandatory.
I think they'll do it on the dealer side the same way they're doing it to us in the bullion world. You know, they'll do it to the automobile industry, whatever they want to do it to, and they'll simply say, you know, yeah, you can sell that Tesla for
whatever,
you know, X number of Bitcoin, but if somebody does that, got to be reported.
We just need to know. Well, the day are long gone when the Bitcoin thing of 2008, when we first heard about it, that it's all private and all that. That's long gone, right? I mean, that was I think that was one
bound not to last.
that was one of the ideas that people were excited about. Oh, this is private, you know. Thinking
well, you know, you poke the bear enough, and eventually, you know, the bear will turn around and bite you. So there is no way, historically, that anything is going to be used as money for transactions that the federal government does not get its piece of. It will not allow anything to come into play that subverts their ability to be able to monitor transactions, because they need or want to know everything. They really do. So, in the old days when there were $1,000 bills that were in print, and, you could move up $1 million worth of cash around between banks and between individuals without any reporting, lots of commerce was being conducted without being reported. Well, they locked that down. And when, other people moved to things like bars of gold and did the same thing, trying to conduct commerce privately with bars of gold, well, the next thing you know, that industry got regulated. So I think that it just seems natural to me that the crypto will follow the same pattern.
They're control freaks. This is what they do for a living. Yeah. What are you going to do?
We don't care what you do. We just want to know about it.
We just want to know about it. Fred Dashevsky in The Real World of Money. So before we go, we really need to talk about Ruska. So what do you make of this, where Putin is now getting gold and Bitcoin and rubles for his gas and his oil and his minerals and his wheat? What do you make of this? What do you think this is going to do to the price of gold, the spot price?
Well,
anything?
Yeah, again, it's interesting. You try to push Russia by saying, okay, we're going to institute a lot of regulations to prevent you from being able to conduct commerce one way or the other. We're going to try to curtail your ability because, we're aggravated at the way you're acting. So we're going to punish you by instituting rules. Okay, so they're going to push back. What Russia did that was interesting, for example, they removed the VAT, the value added tax
on gold
off of the purchase of gold with Russian rubles.
Yeah.
Now, there were rumors that were circulating that they had turned around and backed the ruble with gold. That's not true.
That's not true.
What they did is they removed the VAT, which is significant because the VAT is very expensive. So, European countries have used value added tax, and we've considered that in the United States as an alternative to an income tax. Instead of taxing your income, what we would do is make expensive items, you'd have to pay an extra tax. So if you bought that $100,000 car, you'd have to pay an extra maybe 15% or 20% or 30% on top of the price as your VAT, your value added tax. Well, Russia had this. If you bought gold with rubles, there was a VAT. So it became much more expensive to try to buy gold in rubles than any other currency, which kind of took away the incentive of foreign countries to want to hold rubles. If they couldn't convert it into gold at their discretion, it limited the incentive. So Russia decided, as one method of trying to push back against the Western markets that are trying to push them, he said, we'll remove this value-added tax off of the purchases of gold. So they did do that, and that means that you can now use rubles to buy gold without having to pay the extra VAT on top. And that was to encourage other countries that they're trying to align themselves with to hold rubles. Because, look, honestly, would you want to hold rubles as a store of wealth right now? I mean,
you mean China, India, and Iran, and the other people that are playing around Poland,
Saudi Arabia, whoever they want to align themselves with. They had to create an incentive.
Yeah. So that would put more rubles into the bank, which they wanted to, right? Yeah.
Support for their own country's currency. And they need that because if no one will respect their currency enough to want to hold it, then, by default, we know that the U.S. dollar is not great, but it is still the world's reserve currency for good reason. We still have the best economic environment, the most stable, currency in the world. So people will constantly utilize U.S. dollars. And, of course, we know after Bretton Woods in 1944, we did require every country that signed off on the agreement to have to stockpile U.S. dollars, which is what preserves the dollar's world's reserve status. So Russia would like to see more countries willing to hold the ruble. But again, it's a risky currency right now that, you're not going to be able to convince people readily to do that, especially if there's a VAT on the ability to convert it.
So
you decide it's falling and you want to buy gold.
But the ruble went right back up to where it was pre-war already. I mean, it didn't take them long to move right back up. Did you see the graph on it? Went boop,
I did.
Right back up. But still,
you would have to agree it's kind of risky.
Well, yeah. I mean, everything's risky these days, right? I mean, what currency isn't? I mean, with the dollar, geez. you just talked to us for an hour and told us why the dollar's not worth squat. So,
Right.
what are you going to do? Buy gold and stuff. So what about
Worthless, but not worthless.
Yeah, that's what Andrew used to say. Remember, it's not going to be worthless, but it's going to be worth less, right?
Yeah, for those people that are drawing the line out and thinking that this also translates into, that I'm trying to suggest that the dollar is worthless or will become worthless. I want to be clear. I don't believe that that's the case.
Yes, sir.
I think the dollar survives just in a much weaker form, and that's what people should expect. And also, a lot of people are becoming so concerned about the geopolitical market environments that they're speculating. And I think that is a dangerous thing to do for investors. Even in my industry, I do not encourage people to speculate on short-term market corrections or activity based upon what's happening right now. And I get calls every day.
What do you mean?
Oh,
Give us an idea of what you mean.
Well, somebody calls me and says, I have a couple $100,000 in cash. I want to buy gold or silver today because I think next week the dollar is going to fall apart.
Oh, I see.
And I will tell those people, don't do this. I'm
that.
turning away hundreds and hundreds of thousands in business.
Really?
Because I will not accept the notion that people should be doing this short-term speculation that something's going to change dramatically in the next week or even 3-5 months. If you're not prepared to recognize that their value growth of gold and silver coins is something predicated on the idea of letting inflation erode paper money over time and holding on to this stuff for 5 years or so as a method of the way that you should approach it, I don't think people should get involved in it. I just want to dissuade people from getting over aggressive about speculating because they're hearing so much. And I mean, it's hard not to feel this way. I get it. I mean, if you turn on the news,
well,
you can't listen to it for more than 10 or 15 minutes. Everything is alarming. Everything is, urgent and
it's something
breaking news. And, you would think after 15 minutes that the world was coming to an end.
Yeah.
And if you didn't watch the news for a couple of weeks, amazingly, nothing really changes. But if you watched it on a day-to-day basis, even for an hour or so, boy, you'd walk away thinking that the world was going to collapse tomorrow. And we constantly get people that are that concerned and really worried about this collapsing dollar to the point of zero.
Yeah.
Again, I don't believe that will ever be the case. I think the dollar will always be around, just progressively getting weaker and weaker.
Just slowly becoming worth less, not worthless. Yeah. And then someday, maybe it doesn't, not the world's reserve currency. Who knows?
It's always a possibility. I don't think that's going to happen in the next 10 years or anytime sooner. Again, the U.S. has got this locked down way more than people understand. They are not going to allow the status of the world reserve currency for the U.S. dollar to fade away. Dollar Inc. is well established. And trust me, when you think about, what they are willing to do for anybody that pokes that bear, I mean, we've watched dictators who just suddenly, their country gets liberated.
Thought about because a dinar, right? A gold dinar or whatever.
All you have to do is just create a problem big enough to where you're a risk, and suddenly the whole rationale gets put together for why you need to go. Your dictatorship is, it's always about, protecting the people of your country. It's never about the fact that you're threatening the U.S. dollar status. They won't admit to that. So they'll come up with another pretense. But historically, this has happened numerous times. I mean, everything from Muammar Gaddafi, right to Saddam Hussein, all the way down the line, anybody who pokes the bear will feel the brunt. And I don't think the U.S. Dollar Inc. boys are going to stand for anything or anybody.
There's a lot of people arguing that that's what a lot of this whole Ukraine thing is about, because they just don't like the fact that Putin's kind of an independent nationalist guy and doesn't want NATO on his front door, and they don't like it. And
I don't blame him.
I don't blame him. I mean, Putin's no saint. Believe me, he's a dictator like the rest of them. But,
absolutely. But you can understand, what a difficult position they're in.
Sure.
How much, if you were an independent nation, the nation of Patrick, how far could you go pushing back against trying to convince everybody that you want to work with to not use U.S. dollars? I mean, you just keep running into roadblocks.
Yeah. But these sanctions are not doing a whole lot. I mean, Russia's still surviving, and I don't know what's going on. I read the other day, Fred, he's got like a 80% approval rating. Of course, that could all be made up. You don't know if that's.
I would think so. Yeah, I don't buy that for a moment. Except, who knows what they're hearing?
Sure. Yeah, they control
so
the media.
When you get an approval rating from a country that controls the media, all they're going to be like, all we hear on the news these days is how bad everything is. Well, all they're hearing about is how wonderful Putin is, right?
Right.
Powerful leader fighting against the treacherous Western powers. So, yeah.
But I would think that old Vlad, though, wouldn't have done any of this. He's not stupid. And I don't think, Fred, that he would not know what was going to come his way by doing what he's doing, because he didn't want NATO in there, right? He's got to have China. He's got to have China's back, right? I think with some of this stuff, he's selling oil to China. He's selling oil to India, and now the Iran deal's falling apart. He's going to probably sell them oil, and they're going to sell for rubles and whatever. He'll figure it out. I don't think he's going anywhere anytime soon.
Well, he has that great tool at his disposal, right? They do produce monstrous amounts of oil in Russia, and he can offer to sell it to people who will work with him for, let's say, less than market value, just to encourage them to say, align with me, right? And so he'll build himself a coalition, but again, it'll only go so far.
Did you see where Saudi Arabia actually raised the oil prices because Putin was lowering their oil price?
Yes.
Saudi Arabia.
The Saudi minister made an argument that lowering prices would end up increasing the cost of gas.
What?
I didn't quite follow the logic there.
You don't know what these people are smoking over there, man.
Made the point that there was a good reason to raise the price. So.
Yeah.
Hey.
This is a good one from Carol. What does Fred think about the central bank digital currency that is coming, and what will this do to the dollar? Will it exist in parallel with the dollar? Thanks for the show. Okay. We talked a bit about it, central bank digital currency, CBDCs. It's certainly coming somewhere. I mean, it is, right?
Well,
I don't know what it's going to look like.
It seems logical to me that if you sort of look at the technology, that the movement for our dollar to not take the physical form of paper and to eventually become a completely digital format, I can't suggest that doesn't hold up fairly well. It seems like,
why wouldn't that?
I think over time that seems a likely scenario. It may or may not occur, but I do think the possibility there is stronger than some of the other things that people have suggested. What it'll do, though, is really difficult for the average American on a couple of fronts. The first thing is, number one, as a country, we lose all the transparency in how much money is really in our economic environment. How are we really going to know if it's gone digital? What really exists? Because if we don't have to go through the cycle of the Federal Reserve writing a check to the Treasury, buying a bond, goes on its balance sheet, which we can count, look at the interest payments, follow how much money the Fed has spent, and everything like that.
Yeah, kind of figure it out
if
like we do today.
If we can't see that anymore, how do we know? And that disturbs me. The second thing that I think is even more critical, and this is going to go down a really bad path here, but it's the fact that individual transactions will lose all their all privacy is gone.
Everything.
If everything is digital, that means they also know every single transaction you've made, from large transactions like the purchase of cars and homes to you're buying a pizza at your local pizza shop. And does that translate into government control? This is my concern, is that will they utilize that ability to have that lock on what we do in digital currencies to say, okay, Patrick, we're going to deny your transaction for the purchase of that pizza because we've checked your medical records and
your cholesterol
is too high.
That's right.
So
that's coming, Freddie. It's coming.
Right. So
right?
So suddenly now they're going to curtail activity because they can control the currency that you're using to do those transactions.
Right.
I know that is a somewhat conspiracy theorist type of idea.
I don't think it's a stretch.
The stretch to say to me, if you offer the government that much information that they won't abuse it, history suggests otherwise.
And if they give away these digital currency things right through their phone, if you behave, whatever, get a vax or I don't know, whatever they do, you know they're going to do that, and you know people will take those things because they want them. They'll do it.
Well, again, how do they provide and promote technology? It's always on the basis of ease. It's always on the basis of, well, this is better, this is easier,
this phone.
And they will sell it on the pretense that we're making commerce easier to conduct.
Sure.
It's always going to be the convenience factor that is going to outweigh the privacy issue for people.
Sure.
Because people don't perceive the privacy problem until it's too late.
No.
But they will immediately see the benefit of the ease of the transaction. So the convenience factor is the selling point. And that's what's going to get everybody. It's the same way that Google and Facebook operate. It's the ease of communication that allows everybody to want to publicly provide these companies with all of your private information. Because you and I will definitely agree on this. 20 years ago, if prior to Google and prior to Facebook, I said to you, Patrick, I would like a world where everybody in America tells me where they work, where they like to go to eat, how much money they spend on all these different products. Tell me everything that you like and don't like about products you buy. I want a list of all your friends. I want to know what they all do. I want pictures of every one of your family, friends, and everything that they do. I want to follow your movement through your phone and your car. I want to record everything that you do on the internet for private searches. I want to know everything that you buy. I want to know your political position. And I want you to voluntarily provide me all of that information. You'd have looked at me like I was from Mars. You would have thought that was insane. You would have thought, who would ever voluntarily
do that?
And yet, look at where we are.
Yeah. Look at what's happening.
So it's this convenience factor that concerns me about the digital currency, because I think the same pattern will apply. We'll be sold on the convenience, and they'll argue, it'll prevent money laundering, or prevent illegal transactions, or whatever they sell it as. And then before we know it, we find ourselves subject to a government dictating our lives because they control our money.
So is that what Janet Yellen is talking about, and now about the cryptos and the money laundering and all of that? Is that their meme they're going with?
Yeah, only to the point of dealing with the oligarchs in Russia.
Oh, the oligarchs.
In other words, she's only addressing this now from that standpoint.
Yeah.
But again, a lot of people translate that in their minds and saying, yeah, how far is it going to go before, we see a digital currency in the United States forced upon the public? It's not like we're going to have a choice. If they decide to do this, they're not going to offer you an option. I assure you, it'll be, you do it or you don't.
Fred, this may be above your pay grade, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but so what do you think this whole thing about the Dollar Inc. people, and even in the United States, and this whole thing with Putin, and like he's the devil and you got to go, I mean, what's going on? What, in your opinion, what do you think?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear you.
What do you think it's about, this whole thing that we have to, Putin, and they're getting the oligarchs, and they want to do everything they can to, what do you think this is about? Your personally, what do you think?
Historically, we'll have to look back and see how this all plays out. But I think what we have here is, kind of straightforward. I mean, Putin made a decision that he wants to reincorporate Ukraine as part of what was the former Soviet Republic. He sees them as a major stepping stone to increasing his power. And they were perhaps that thorn in his side, standing independent. And now, after having made that decision, I'm not sure that he really was clear about how far the West would, go in response. I've heard things from people, and again, I don't put credence in this one way or the other, but the prevailing mentality is that he did not think that the West would stand up to him, that we would just simply let this go, that we wouldn't do anything when he invaded Ukraine. Because remember, 2 days before he invaded, he said, "I'm not invading Ukraine."
Of course. Well, politicians always do that, right?
No, we're not amassing troops on the border. No, I don't know what you're talking about.
The NATO deal, though, there's a lot of people that argue opposite of what you've just said, that it wasn't about he wasn't interested in. The only reason he wants to take over Ukraine. This is the other argument, is that the United States put in what's his face in 2014. That was a coup. I mean, you can go on YouTube and hear the phone call with Victoria Nuland. They put him in, and the guy in 2014 they put in Zelensky, and he didn't want NATO in there, and that was his argument for years. He said,
again,
that's
may
an
be
interesting
the case.
argument, right?
That may be the case. I did not follow what was happening in Russia prior to this with any real degree, so I'm not as familiar with let's say, the buildup to what brought us to this point. So I am coming at this like a lot of people, kind of after the fact and seeing the end results. Up with it.
Yeah. The United States put in. The United States put in what's his name, and then they put in Zelensky, and he doesn't want those rockets on his border, and they got 250 miles of a border with Ukraine, and sure. Russia's got this long history of being invaded. Richard Mayberry was on a show and said that Hitler killed 20 million Russians in World War II.
Yes, he did. People forget that.
20 million Russians.
Right.
Again, I know Putin's no angel, but I think there's a whole lot more to it. And many people are talking about. What does Fred think about the currency called goldback from Cindy in Alabama? Goldback? I never heard that one. Goldback? Is there such a thing?
Don't know.
It's probably a new one. I don't know. Goldback? I don't know.
Things are popping up left and right. And I will say one thing, that it's interesting to me that any of these things are even happening, because to me it's an indication of that lack of confidence that people are having in the dollar.
Yeah.
If you were comfortable with the dollar, why would you look elsewhere? So I think all of these are indications that there is a prevailing lack of confidence that's growing. A lot more suspicion amongst the average American about the nature of money. And unfortunately, some of them do fall down the conspiracy theory rabbit holes. And, it's hard not to, but I think the point is still well made that there are reasons that people are looking at alternatives. It's because I think they're beginning to recognize there is a flaw in the way we're operating as a country. And it's becoming difficult for the average American because the size of the problem has gotten really large. It's out of control. There were points that we still could have managed a lot of these issues in reasonable fashion without danger to the entire economic structure. Now we're facing problems that are so big. We have too big to fail banks. We have entire economic environments that are teeter-tottering on disaster. You have countries that are imploding, massive revolts, around the world whenever the currency problems become exacerbated and the government takes its extreme actions to fight the problems. We've yet to really experience anything like that in America, but I do think, again, as we talked about earlier, the inflation problem right now is so clear that even those people that are not normally inclined to follow the broader economic stuff can see that there's something going on.
Yeah. I wonder what the real inflation number is. Last time we checked Shadow Stats,
I say it's 15. Twice what they report.
Yeah, that Shadow Stats says is 15%. So it's probably
so they close. Say 7.5. I think 15 is more accurate. Whoa. I said a couple of interviews before this with you that I thought that there would be about a 30% increase from 2 years ago to now.
I remember.
In the average consumer's life in just general goods and services. And I think that's turned out to be quite accurate.
I feed Doodle grass-fed organic beef. She's living large, man. That's what she eats, and it's going up $2 a pound.
Huh?
$2 in the last 2 months. $2 a pound going up. They just raise it up.
Well, you just can't keep printing money as a response to every economic problem without an expectation that it's going to have an impact. And unfortunately, it's not the government that feels that impact. It's the public.
No, they don't.
It's the person who's just trying to save and just put $1 away for their future. What's interesting to me is I have a lot of really young customers now.
Yeah,
and a lot of families that have younger kids that are beginning to learn this sort of stuff. And some of the small preteens are saying, "Hey, give me a silver dollar, give me half a dollar to put away."
No kidding.
They're becoming aware and interested in the idea of real money. I think that's great. I always pose this question to people, and I guess, looking at this broad situation, where is your money and what form is it? Mm-hmm. What does it constitute in real world terms?
Where is it? Yeah,
just think about that in terms of what you're saving.
And people say, well, I got stock, so I got this, but what is that? Is it a piece of paper?
Yeah.
Is it a promise? Somebody put a thing on Facebook, on my Facebook, was, there's no such thing as government funded. It's all taxpayer funded. Don't you love that one?
That's absolutely right.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Right? Who pays for all this stuff? It's not like the government, Congress says, "Oh, okay, take this out of my salary,
right,
and fund this program."
Do you see where now Biden's talking about continuing the moratorium on the payments for all the student loans too? So I don't know where that money comes from. That's coming from somewhere, right? Somewhere.
Well,
like
again,
you say, it's
you're
cooking the
facing a
books
real
somewhere,
big problem,
right?
this gap in government spending versus what they need.
Right.
So they have to kind of make contrition somewhere. They have to say, well, we have to either cut this or cut that. And, then it becomes a political game. So now we get down to the particular decisions, which are based more on the political. So, we talked earlier about, how much influence does a president have on an economy? What impact does an administration really have? A lot of that comes down to those particular kinds of decisions.
Sure.
Do we give the benefit to the corporations? Do we give the benefits to the wealthy people? Do we give the benefit to the poor? Who gets the benefit? Because we have to make some cuts somewhere. You just can't continue to operate under the pace we are. So politically, you just have to pick your third rail and say, what's the least dangerous thing I can do to maintain support within my party and still somehow try to actually do something to make this economic environment better. It's just a hard position to be in.
I would argue there's going to be a lot more free stuff between now and November, because they're going to get their booties kicked anyway. And so I think they're going to try to give away a lot of stuff just to maybe they can eke out a few wins, in this midterm.
If they do, it's just a matter of more money being printed. So
of course,
just sort
that's
of
the whole point. Yeah.
Reemphasizes my position. Diversify your wealth and make sure you include that tangible asset as a part of what you put away long term.
Final email, then we'll let you go back to selling and buying gold and silver coins. From the UK, if Fed had to put a finger on it, how long would he say this inflationary period will last?
Well, that's a great question.
It is a good question. I don't know.
It's a great question because the Fed has argued last year that it would have been gone by now. So it was all transitory last year. That didn't hold up. So now we're past that point. So now we're at how long will it take the Fed to fight off the inflation? It's a function of how quickly they can raise interest rates without sending their economy into a recession. Mm-hmm. So that puts us out, if we go based upon Brainerd's recent Fed comments, he said they want to start aggressively quantitative tightening as early as May.
Less money
so
printing.
Starting next month.
That's what that means, right? Less.
Yeah. So this is reducing this monster balance sheet of $9 trillion. Okay. Now the Fed means that the Fed's going to try to sell into the open market some of these debt instruments that it has acquired at the same time that the government needs to raise more money for its own deficit spending problems. I don't see the two of them being able to be simultaneously productive. I don't think you can do quantitative tightening while a government is trying to sustain a deficit spending problem by trying to sell more debt. You're fighting two things again. It's like pushing on a rope.
Which is why a lot of people are arguing, Fred, that they're not going to do it. They're just not going to.
I think it's going to be problematic. So the short answer is, at the pace that they're suggesting at the Fed, they're talking at least 2 years before they can reduce the balance sheet back to where it was pre-pandemic.
But then wouldn't the interest rates go all the way up to maybe
Yes.
I mean, I'm sorry.
Yes, they would.
I'm not sorry. Interest rates, but interest rates and inflation could go higher, just like they did in the '70s when gold went from
Right.
$35 to $850.
Thus, the conundrum that I have
The
laid out
conundrum.
and suggested that I don't believe the Fed can do this. I don't
Wow.
think it can pull this magic trick off. I don't think it can simultaneously reduce $5 trillion off its balance sheet
Right.
and raise interest rates and not send the country spinning into a recession. I don't think it can pull it off.
Can't do it. How could they do
So,
it? The math doesn't
2
work.
years
Does it?
minimum for the inflation rate to begin to subside, and then whether it subsides after that, I'm not convinced it's going to slow down significantly. The Fed, just like they were convinced last year that all this was transitory, now they're convinced that this 7.5% inflation that they're reporting, which we believe to be 15,
Yes,
is
sir.
going to magically fade away on its own within the next year or two.
People
And
aren't going to lower their
I'm having a hard
prices
time with that.
just for fun. You think the meat guy that I buy from is going to say, "Well, okay, I'm going to lower it back down"? Why would they?
Yeah. Why?
Why would-
Because the Fed raised rates a quarter point?
No. No.
Yeah, I don't get it either. So
Yeah.
2 years minimum at the current levels. We should see a slowdown of inflation after that, but how much is going to be dependent upon how the Fed manages this quote unquote soft landing, whether they can pull it off. And I will just say, historically, the Fed has a horrible history of attempting to do something this difficult.
doing something right.
And they've
Wow.
never tried it with numbers this large, by the way. Never, ever close.
And so, but if mortgage rates go to 10 or whatever they did in the 80s, late 70s, it was up to about 15, right? What would that do to the housing market? And that's a huge deal, isn't it? With GDP.
Well, the housing market is really, it's got a big problem. It's going to slow down some of the purchases for sure, but there is still a housing shortage.
No.
So you've got a kind of a dual-edged sword there as well, in that you've got a lot of people that need a place to live.
Right.
There aren't sufficient homes available. The builders are saying that they're looking to build millions and millions of homes in America to help supply places for people to go, and yet they're going to try to sell them when interest rates continue to climb and the mortgage rates go up and the expense of that mortgage climbs. I don't know how successful
It looks
that
like
will
a
be.
disaster in the making with a million homes that nobody wants at 10%.
You could end up with a lot of overvalued real estate.
30-year fixed, right? Or 10 or 15%.
Yeah.
Who can afford that? Nobody.
Again, it's going to be very problematic. We're in a very unusual economic environment
I think
now.
people should buy gold and silver. I don't know about you, but I'm just thinking.
That's not a bad idea. I think I might get in that business.
You should probably get in that business. I think people like buying gold and silver coins. All right, Fred, I'll let you go. I got to go too, and I'm going to go on and do a show. So tell folks. Let me pull up your thing again and tell folks about your company before we let you go. Here, there you are.
Yeah, U.S. Coin Capital. So well situated now to help educate people on how to properly acquire physical gold and silver coins. We are constantly working with the market and trying to provide the best inventory and value for various parts of the silver and gold market. What we do is physical. You, as the customer, get the actual physical gold and silver coins delivered right to your doorstep, and give us a call. We'll be happy to help educate you on how to do this properly and work with both the novice and the well-educated investor. But I do believe for everybody, it's diversification is the key to success. We don't know what any economic environment is going to be in the future for certain. We do know historically, though, that being diversified is the smartest play.
And so if you want to talk to Fred, his number is 800-878-2646. You got a team there? Team to take some calls. You got a team to take some calls. All right, kid, buy low and sell high. Is that what you want? Okay, yeah, do that. I'll see you, Fred. Thanks for being here. It was a great show.
All right, Patrick.
Good job. Yeah, great show. Take care.